We are in Viterbo just 2 hours ahead of the start of our
Right.
migration conference. And we have the great pleasure to have with us Professor Hiroshi Motomura, who is professor of law at UCLA School of Law. And he's one of the leading scholars in immigration law in the United States. So thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me here. This is a very welcome opportunity.
Professor Motomura wrote an important book on borders and belonging, published by Oxford University Press. So we have the chance to ask himself about the book. My first question would be about borders. Why are borders so relevant today, still relevant, and how do they affect individual liberties?
Well, I can give you two answers to that question, but I think they fit together in some way. I mean, one answer is that national borders, immigration policy, refugees, there's so much in the center of politics, right? And so much of politics, I think, throughout the world is centered around migration regulations. And even if we're talking about the EU, it's not so much the border between Italy and France, but it's really more about how migration regulation really dominates national politics. And so borders are a very important political fact. So that's one answer. The other answer I can give you, which is less obvious, but I think it's important to think about, is that we have borders throughout our lives. We have borders who is allowed to study at university. For example, in the United States, membership in an Indian tribe is very much a border. And so in some ways, I think we have many places in our lives where we have a sense of who belongs and who doesn't and who's in between. And national borders are a particular type of that thing, which is based on territory and the politics of how lines between countries were drawn historically.
Okay. So the title of your book is about borders, but also belonging.
Right.
Why is belonging so relevant?
Well, I think that national borders is one way we define belonging. There are people who are citizens of a country. There are also people who are not citizens, but who live there a long time. There are also people who are in a country and they do not necessarily have immigration law status. They may be irregular migrants. And so each of these things determines how one integrates into society. And so that's why the book is about belonging. It's really about the relationship between national borders and who belongs in that society. But in making that connection, I think it's important to realize that national borders are not just physical lines. You could have someone living in your society, someone who could be your neighbor, but they could be irregular migrants, they could be temporary migrants, they could have limited access to social welfare. So the physical border is important, but the book is also about the lines or the distinctions we draw between people, sometimes based on immigration status, but that determines how someone belongs and how they feel they belong.
Right. And the last part of the title of your book is about fair balance.
Yeah.
How do we find it?
Well, that's a tough challenge. I think a lot of politics has been polarized. You have people with a view that the border should be restricted or closed. You also have a view that borders should be open um, or um, or relatively open, and that's been a great source of polarization. What I'm trying to do in this book is to map a way to think about what the future might be. It's a book that is, I used to think it was focused on the year 2030, and maybe it's now focused on the year 2050. It depends. But it's really trying to get to first principles about why we have borders, what injustices might come from borders, but also what kinds of benefits might come from borders. A sense of belonging that is, I think, healthy and positive, but is not used to discriminate or to inflict cruelty on people. So the book deals with 10 basic questions, starting with why national borders and why not. And it tries to map a way into the future. I don't pretend that this will be something that will be implemented into law or into actual policy in the next 5 years or 10 years. But I think it's important to think about what the future ought to hold, because otherwise we're just reacting to what's going on, saying, I'm against this, I'm against that. But I think it's important to understand what your basic principles are.
Thank you very much. I think it is a great introduction to your book.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you.